The distant rumble of an approaching locomotive stirred Clifton Hill, Colorado, into a frenzy of activity on a sweltering August afternoon in 1876. Quinn Xavier stood at the edge of the platform, his weathered Stetson hat clutched nervously in calloused hands, watching as the train belched black smoke into the clear mountain air. The letter in his breast pocket, the one confirming the arrival of Catherine Prescott, his mail-order bride, felt heavier than the six-shooter strapped to his hip. The train screeched to a halt, steam billowing across the wooden platform. Quinn's throat tightened as passengers began to disembark. He described himself honestly in his letters, 30 years old, owner of a modest but growing cattle ranch outside town, sandy-haired and blue-eyed with a face that had seen its share of weather. But what of Catherine? Her letters had been forthright about everything except her appearance, which she described with only the vaguest of terms. A woman descended from the train, her burgundy traveling dress dusty from the journey. She moved with hesitation, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked with Quinn's. Something in her gaze, determination mixed with fear, made his heart stutter. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 25, with honey-colored hair tucked beneath a modest bonnet. But what caught his attention was the way she carried herself chin-high despite the visible nervousness in her steps. "Mr. Xavier?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. Quinn nodded, suddenly aware of his dust-covered clothes and unshaven face. "Miss Prescott." "Welcome to Clifton Hill." He extended his hand, then awkwardly withdrew it, unsure of the proper greeting. She offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for meeting me. I hope my journey hasn't caused you any inconvenience." "Not at all." Quinn gestured toward her single trunk. "Is this all your belongings?" "Yes. I travel light." Something in her tone suggested more than simple practicality. As Quinn lifted her trunk, Catherine adjusted her high-necked collar, and he noticed how she kept the right side of her face slightly turned away from him. They walked in silence through the bustling main street of Clifton Hill, past the general store, the sheriff's office, and Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house where colorful quilts hung from the upstairs windows. "The town's small," Quinn explained, "but it's growing. The silver mines up north have brought prosperity. My ranch is about 5 miles outside town." Catherine nodded, her eyes taking in everything with the wariness of someone accustomed to looking for threats. "Your letters mentioned 50 head of cattle, 63 now, had a good calving season." Quinn led her to his wagon, helping her up onto the wooden seat. "I know this isn't what you're used to in Philadelphia. I assure you, Mr. Xavier, Philadelphia holds no fond memories for me." Her fingers absently traced the high collar of her dress. "I'm looking forward, not backward." As they rode out of town, Quinn found himself stealing glances at his bride-to-be. She was pretty, with delicate features and intelligent green eyes, but there was something guarded about her, like a wild animal that had been caged too long. The right side of her face remained angled away from him, and whenever he shifted to get a better view, she subtly adjusted her position. The rolling foothills gave way to pine-covered slopes as they headed toward the mountains. Catherine's rigid posture gradually relaxed as they left the town behind, her eyes widening at the sprawling landscape. "It's beautiful," she whispered, almost to herself. "So open." Quinn felt a surge of pride. "Wait till you see it at sunrise. The mountains catch the light in a way that makes them look like they're on fire." For the first time, Catherine turned fully toward him, forgetting her careful positioning. Quinn fought to keep his expression neutral, as he saw what she'd been hiding, a jagged scar that ran from her right temple down to her jawline, twisting her otherwise smooth skin into a ridge of puckered tissue. Their eyes met, and he knew she'd caught his momentary surprise. She quickly turned away, her spine stiffening. "I should have mentioned it in my letters," she said, her voice tight. "I understand if you wish to reconsider our arrangement." Quinn kept his gaze on the trail ahead. "Miss Prescott, I didn't advertise for a pretty face. I advertised for a partner. Someone willing to work alongside me and build something meaningful." He paused. "Unless you're reconsidering," Catherine's hands twisted in her lap. "No, but I've learned that men often say one thing while thinking another." The bitterness in her voice spoke volumes. Quinn chose his next words carefully. "Out here, we're judged by what we can endure. The land doesn't care about appearances." They continued in silence until the ranch came into view, a modest two-story cabin with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings nestled in a valley sheltered by pine-covered hills. Smoke curled from the chimney. "Mrs. Holloway from town comes by 3 times a week to help with cooking and housekeeping," Quinn explained. "She's here today to prepare for your arrival." Catherine's eyes widened slightly. "That was thoughtful of you," Quinn shrugged, embarrassed. "Didn't want your first meal here to be my cooking." As they approached, the front door opened, and a plump, gray-haired woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "About time you got here," she called. "Supper's nearly cold." Mrs. Holloway enveloped Catherine in an unexpected hug before stepping back to examine her. Her eyes flickered briefly to the scar but settled warmly on Catherine's face. "Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? Come in, come in. You must be exhausted from your journey." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a sturdy table, a stone fireplace, and several well-worn chairs. A staircase led to what Catherine presumed were bedrooms. "It's not much," Quinn said, suddenly seeing his home through a stranger's eyes. "It's more than I expected," Catherine replied honestly. "And it smells wonderful in here." Mrs. Holloway beamed. "Venison stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Now sit, both of you, before it all goes to waste." During dinner, Mrs. Holloway carried most of the conversation, sharing town gossip and asking Catherine polite questions about her journey. Quinn noticed how Catherine carefully answered, revealing little about her life before boarding the train. When Mrs. Holloway finally departed, promising to return in 2 days, an awkward silence settled between them. "I've prepared the spare room for you," Quinn said, gesturing toward the stairs. "We'll wait for the wedding until you're sure, until you're ready." Catherine's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you, that's very decent of you. The minister comes through town every 3rd Sunday. That gives you nearly 2 weeks to change your mind if you wish." She studied him as if searching for some hidden motive. "And if I do change my mind, then I'll pay your fare back to Philadelphia." Quinn met her gaze steadily. "This arrangement only works if we both choose it freely." Something flashed in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or cautious hope. "Good night, Mr. Xavier." "Quinn," he corrected gently. "If we're to be partners, you might as well use my given name." "Then good night, Quinn," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "And you may call me Catherine." That night, Quinn lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving about his home. A floorboard creaked in the spare room. Water splashed in the basin. The rustle of fabric. Simple sounds that somehow made the cabin feel less empty. He wondered about the scar on Catherine's face, not its appearance, which bothered him far less than she clearly expected, but its origin. What had happened to her in Philadelphia? What had driven her to seek a new life with a stranger in the wilderness? Morning came with a brilliant sunrise that painted the mountains in gold and crimson. Quinn rose early as usual, feeding the horses and checking on a pregnant heifer before returning to the cabin. To his surprise, Catherine was already awake, dressed in a simple blue calico dress. her hair neatly braided down her back. She stood at the stove, frowning in concentration as she prodded at something in a cast iron skillet. "Good morning," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. She turned, unconsciously positioning the scarred side of her face away from him. "I hope you don't mind. I thought I should make myself useful." "Not at all," Quinn approached, peering into the skillet. "Though I should warn you that Mrs. Holloway has spoiled me with her cooking." A flicker of amusement crossed Catherine's face. "Then you're in for a disappointment. I'm afraid my culinary skills are limited." "Can't be worse than mine," he assured her, reaching past her for the coffee pot. Their arms brushed and Catherine flinched almost imperceptibly. Quinn pretended not to notice, stepping back to give her space. Over a breakfast of slightly burned bacon and surprisingly good biscuits, Quinn outlined the day ahead. "I need to check the herd in the north pasture. You're welcome to join me if you'd like to see more of the ranch." Catherine nodded. "I'd prefer that to sitting idle." An hour later, they rode side by side across open grassland, the mountains rising majestically before them. Quinn on his favorite gelding, Rusty, and Catherine on a gentle mare named Daisy. Catherine rode well with the confidence of someone who'd spent time in the saddle before. "You didn't mention you could ride," Quinn remarked. "You didn't ask." Catherine adjusted her bonnet against the morning sun. "My father kept horses before he lost everything." It was the first personal detail she'd volunteered. Quinn waited, hoping she might continue, but she fell silent again, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The herd was grazing peacefully in the valley, dark shapes scattered across the green meadow. Quinn pointed out features of the land: the creek that provided water year-round, the sheltered hollow where the cattle weathered winter storms, the distant line of trees marking the property's boundary. "It's all yours?" Catherine asked, surveying the expanse. "Ours if you stay," Quinn corrected. "I homesteaded initially, but I've been able to purchase adjacent parcels over the years." "How long have you been here?" 8 years. Quinn's eyes traced the familiar contours of the land. "Came west after the war with nothing but a mule and a Springfield rifle." Catherine studied his profile. "You fought in the war," Quinn nodded, his expression darkening slightly. "Union Army. Enlisted in '63, just after I turned 17. Saw things no boy should see." He shook his head, dispelling the memories. "But that's long past now." They dismounted near a shallow bend in the creek to let the horses drink. Catherine removed her bonnet, tilting her face to the sun. With her guard momentarily lowered, Quinn could see that the scar continued down her neck, disappearing beneath her high collar. "My father was a businessman in Philadelphia," she said suddenly, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "He made poor investments, borrowed money from dangerous men. When he couldn't repay them, they came to our home." Quinn remained still, afraid any movement might stop her words. "My mother was already dead. Consumption took her years before. It was just father and me. The men said they were going to teach him a lesson." Her voice grew hollow. "I tried to stop them. One of them had a knife." Quinn's hands clenched involuntarily. "I'm sorry." Catherine's eyes met his, challenging. "I don't want your pity." "It's not pity to be angry about an injustice," Quinn replied evenly. "Did they face consequences?" A bitter smile twisted Catherine's lips. "My father did. He hanged himself the next day, leaving me with his debts, and this," she gestured to her face. "The men who did this, they're probably still collecting debts in Philadelphia." The raw pain in her voice made Quinn's chest ache. "Is that why you came west, to escape them?" "Partly," Catherine admitted, "but also to escape the looks, the whispers, the proposals that dried up, the friends who suddenly had no time for me." Her fingers absently traced the scar through her sleeve. "In Philadelphia, I was damaged goods. I thought perhaps out here, Where life is harder, such things might matter less. Quinn studied her face, not just the scar, but the strength and determination that radiated from her eyes. They matter less to those worth knowing. Catherine looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "We should check your cattle." They remounted and rode toward the herd. Quinn demonstrated how he counted them, pointing out distinctive markings on certain animals, explaining his breeding program. Catherine listened attentively, asking questions that revealed a quick mind. As they turned back toward the ranch, dark clouds began gathering over the mountains. "Summer thunderstorm," Quinn explained, eyeing the sky. "They can come on fast. We should hurry." They urged their horses to a trot, but the storm moved faster. Wind whipped across the grassland, bending the tall stalks in rippling waves. The first fat raindrops began to fall when they were still a mile from the cabin. "There's a line shack just over that rise," Quinn shouted over the rising wind, pointing to a small hill. "We can wait it out there." By the time they reached the simple one-room structure, they were both soaked. Quinn quickly unsaddled the horses and led them inside the cramped space, where at least they'd be out of the wind and lightning. The shack was little more than a shelter: a dirt floor, a small wood stove, a narrow cot, and some basic provisions. Quinn struck a match to light a lantern while Catherine stood dripping by the door. Thunder crashed overhead, making her jump. Outside, rain lashed against the small window, and wind howled through the cracks in the weathered boards. "Here," Quinn said, handing her a rough woolen blanket from a shelf. "You'll catch your death if you stay in those wet clothes." Catherine accepted the blanket but made no move to remove her sodden dress. Water dripped from her hair, plastering strands to her face and neck, including the scarred side she usually kept hidden. She clutched the blanket to her chest like a shield. Quinn turned his back to her, busying himself with starting a fire in the small stove. "I won't look," he promised, his voice deliberately casual. "But you really should get out of those wet things. I'll do the same once you're settled." He heard the rustle of wet fabric behind him, then silence. After what seemed like an appropriate interval, he asked, "May I turn around now?" "Yes." Catherine sat on the edge of the cot, the blanket wrapped tightly around her. Her wet dress and petticoats hung from a nail on the wall. Her hair, freed from its braid, hung in damp waves around her shoulders. Without the high collar of her dress, the full extent of her scar was visible, running down her neck to her collarbone before disappearing beneath the blanket. The vulnerability in her expression made Quinn's chest tighten. "Your turn," she said, fixing her gaze on the small window. Quinn quickly stripped off his wet shirt and trousers, wrapping another blanket around his waist before hanging his clothes next to hers. The small stove was beginning to warm the shack, dispelling the damp chill. "Looks like we'll be here a while," he said, settling on a wooden crate across from her. "Storm's not letting up." Catherine nodded, her eyes still averted. An uncomfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the drumming of rain on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. Quinn searched for a safe topic of conversation. "You mentioned your father kept horses. Did you ride often in Philadelphia?" "Yes, though only in proper ladies' fashion side saddle in the park with an escort." A faint smile touched her lips. "But sometimes, when we visited my uncle's farm in the summer, I would ride astride like the boys, galloping across the fields. My mother was scandalized, but my father just laughed." "You must have been close to him," Quinn observed. Catherine's smile faded. "I was. Despite his failings, and there were many, he loved me. After Mother died, it was just the two of us against the world. At least, that's what he always said." Her fingers twisted in the blanket. "He never intended for things to end as they did." "Few people do," Quinn said softly. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the small shack, something shifted between them, a tentative bridge forming across the gulf of their separate pasts. "What about your family?" Catherine asked. "You haven't mentioned them." Quinn poked at the stove, adjusting the damper. "Not much to tell. Father was a blacksmith in Ohio. Mother taught school. Both gone now. Influenza took them while I was away at war. Had a younger brother, Ethan, who followed me into the army. He didn't come home." "I'm sorry," Catherine said, and Quinn recognized the same lack of pity in her voice that he tried to convey earlier, just acknowledgement of a shared understanding of loss. "That's why I came west," Quinn continued. "Nothing left for me back home. Wanted to build something of my own." "And have you built something you're proud of?" Quinn considered the question. "Getting there. Ranch is profitable now, cabin's solid, land's good." He met her eyes. "But a home needs more than sturdy walls." Catherine looked away, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Is that why you sent for a bride?" "To complete your home, partly," Quinn admitted. "But mostly because it gets mighty lonely talking to just cows and horses." His attempt at humor earned him a small smile. Encouraged, he continued, "Truth is, I want a family, children someday, but more than that, I want a partner. Someone to share the good days and weather the bad ones with." "And you think I could be that person?" Catherine's voice held genuine curiosity. "Despite knowing so little about me." "I know you're brave," Quinn said simply. "Coming all this way to meet a stranger. Starting fresh despite what you've been through. That tells me more about your character than 100 letters could." The rain began to lessen, the thunderous downpour softening to a steady patter. Catherine stood, adjusting her blanket more securely. "Our clothes won't be dry for hours," she observed. "No," Quinn agreed. "But the rain's letting up. We could make a run for the cabin if you're willing to ride wrapped in blankets." Catherine considered this, then shook her head. "Perhaps we should wait a bit longer. I'd rather not parade through Clifton Hill looking like a drowned rat." Quinn chuckled. "Fair point, though we're unlikely to encounter anyone between here and the ranch." They settled into a more comfortable silence, listening to the diminishing storm. Quinn produced a small tin of coffee from the shack's provisions, brewing it on the stove. They passed the single cup between them, their fingers occasionally brushing. "Tell me about the ranch," Catherine requested. "What does the year look like here?" Quinn described the rhythm of ranch life, calving in spring, cattle drives in summer, preparation for winter and fall, and the long, snow-bound months when the world narrowed to the essential tasks of survival. "It sounds demanding," Catherine remarked. "It is," Quinn acknowledged. "But rewarding too. There's satisfaction in seeing direct results from your labor, and beauty in the changing seasons." "And what would my role be? If I stayed," Quinn considered her question carefully. "That would partly be for you to determine. The ranch needs tending, gardening, preserving food, caring for the chickens and milk cows. But beyond that, I'd hope you'd find your own interests, your own contributions." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "I've never shied away from work. In Philadelphia, after Father died, I took in sewing to pay the debts. My hands no labor." "I never doubted it," Quinn said. "A woman who travels across the country to marry a stranger isn't afraid of challenges." By the time their clothes were dry enough to be reasonably comfortable, the storm had passed, leaving behind a freshly washed world. They emerged from the shack into brilliant late afternoon sunshine, the air clean and sweet with the scent of wet earth and pine. The ride back to the cabin was peaceful, the landscape transformed by the recent rain, wildflowers more vibrant, grass greener, distant mountains sharper against the sky. They rode close together, no longer as awkward as strangers but not yet comfortable as friends. As they approached the ranch, Catherine suddenly asked, "Are you disappointed?" Now that you've seen me properly, Quinn reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her directly. No, are you disappointed in what you found here? Catherine considered this, her eyes scanning the modest cabin, the small barn, the fenced garden plot. No, she said finally. It's honest, like you. That evening they prepared a simple supper together, moving around the kitchen in a careful dance of shared space. Catherine proved more adept at cooking than she'd initially claimed, explaining that she'd downplayed her skills to manage his expectations. A wise strategy, Quinn admitted with a smile. Though it wouldn't have mattered. I'm easy to please when it comes to food. And what about when it comes to wives? Catherine asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. Quinn set down the plates he was carrying, giving her question proper consideration. I value honesty, hard work, and kindness to animals and people alike. I appreciate someone who can laugh, especially at themselves. I don't need perfection, just someone willing to face each day alongside me, come what may. Those seem like reasonable expectations, Catherine said, her expression softening. Though I can't promise I'll always be kind. I have a temper when provoked. Good, Quinn replied. Spirited is better than subdued. I'd rather argue occasionally with a woman who speaks her mind than live with one who silently resents me. They ate by lamplight, discussing practical matters, the vegetable garden that needed tending, the upcoming cattle sale in Denver, repairs the cabin required before winter. It was the conversation of potential partners, testing the waters of collaboration. After supper, Quinn showed Catherine his small bookshelf, a luxury he'd allowed himself over the years. She ran her fingers along the spines, her eyes lighting up at several titles. You enjoy reading? She asked, surprised. When there's time, Quinn replied. Winters especially. The nights are long. Catherine selected a volume of Whitman's poetry. May I? Of course. What's mine is yours to use. They settled in chairs before the hearth, Catherine with her poetry and Quinn with a ledger book containing the ranch accounts. The quiet companionship of the moment struck him as more intimate somehow than their earlier conversation in the line shack. These numbers look promising, Catherine remarked, glancing over at the ledger. You're turning a good profit on your cattle. Quinn raised his eyebrows, impressed. You understand ranch accounting. I understand business, Catherine replied. Father taught me, though it wasn't considered proper for a lady to concern herself with such matters. After he died, those skills kept me from complete destitution. Would you like to review the books? Quinn offered, surprising himself with the suggestion. I'd welcome a fresh perspective. Catherine set aside her poetry, accepting the ledger with evident interest. For the next hour, she pored over his figures, asking occasional questions about feed costs, market prices, and breeding expenses. Quinn answered honestly, including details about the loan he'd taken to purchase additional land last year. You're doing well, she concluded, returning the ledger. Though you might consider diversifying. Relying solely on cattle leaves you vulnerable to disease or market fluctuations. Quinn nodded thoughtfully. What would you suggest? Sheep, perhaps? Or expanding your garden to sell produce in town? Catherine shrugged. I'd need to better understand the local market before making specific recommendations. Mrs. Holloway would be a good source of information, Quinn suggested. She knows everyone's business in Clifton Hill. Catherine smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. Then I shall interrogate her thoroughly when she returns. When they finally retired for the night, Quinn found himself lying awake again, listening to the sounds of Catherine preparing for bed. But tonight, the sounds seemed less foreign, less intrusive. Instead, they carried a hint of rightness, as if the cabin had been waiting for her presence to feel complete. The next day brought a return to ranch routines, but now with Catherine's presence altering the familiar patterns. She rose early, joining Quinn for breakfast before he headed out to check the cattle. While he worked, she explored the cabin and its surroundings, familiarizing herself with the garden, the chicken coop, and the small root cellar behind the kitchen. When Quinn returned at midday, he found her in the garden, wearing a faded calico dress and a wide-brimmed straw hat, pulling weeds with determined efficiency. "The tomatoes need staking," she informed him without preamble. "And something's been at the carrots rabbits, I suspect." Quinn leaned against the garden fence, enjoying the picture she made among the greenery. "Mrs. Holloway usually handles the garden. You don't need to work your first days here." Catherine straightened, wiping soil from her hands. "I prefer to be useful. Idleness doesn't suit me." "Then I won't stop you," Quinn conceded with a smile. "But I did think we might ride into town this afternoon. You should meet some of the neighbors, and we need supplies." Catherine's hand instinctively rose to her scarred cheek. Already, Quinn recognized the flicker of anxiety in her eyes. "Better to get it over with. People will be curious no matter when you appear. Might as well face them directly." Her shoulders squared with resolve. "You're right. Let me change into something more presentable." An hour later, they rode into Clifton Hill side by side. The town was bustling with its usual afternoon activity: ranchers purchasing supplies, women chatting outside the general store, workers from the silver mines spending their wages at the saloon. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. Heads turned as they tied their horses at the hitching post in front of Jenkins' general store. Quinn saw the moment people registered Catherine's scar, the brief widening of eyes, the quickly masked reactions. To her credit, Catherine kept her chin high, though her knuckles were white where she gripped her reticule. "Mr. Xavier," Amos Jenkins called as they entered the store. "Heard your bride had arrived. Welcome to Clifton Hill, madam." "Thank you," Catherine replied with poise. "I'm Catherine Prescott. Soon to be Quinn Xavier, I understand," Jenkins said with a wink at Quinn. "When's the wedding?" "When the circuit minister returns," Quinn answered, placing a protective hand at the small of Catherine's back. "We need some supplies, Amos." As they moved through the store selecting necessities, Quinn became aware of whispers behind them. He was about to turn and confront the gossipers when Catherine placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Let them talk," she said quietly. "Their opinions matter little to me." Quinn admired her composure, though he could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. He was relieved when Mrs. Holloway bustled into the store, immediately making her way to Catherine's side. "There you are. I was hoping to catch you in town." The older woman enveloped Catherine in another of her enthusiastic hugs. "You must join us for Quilting Circle on Thursday. All the ranch wives attend, and it's the perfect way to get acquainted." Before Catherine could respond, the store's bell jangled as three well-dressed women entered. At their head was Viola Thornton, wife of the bank owner and self-appointed arbiter of Clifton Hill society. Her gaze landed immediately on Catherine, eyes narrowing as she took in the scar. "Mrs. Holloway," Viola greeted coolly. "Won't you introduce us to your companion, Mrs.?" Holloway's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. This is Miss Catherine Prescott, soon to be Mrs. Xavier. Catherine, this is Mrs. Thornton, Mrs. Emmett, and Mrs. Daniels." Viola Thornton extended a gloved hand. "How interesting to meet you, Miss Prescott. We had heard Quinn had sent for a bride, but you're not quite what we expected." The insult was delivered with such practiced sweetness that it took a moment to register. Quinn felt a surge of anger, but before he could speak, Catherine responded. "How fortunate, then, that I'm marrying Mr. Xavier and not expecting to meet your expectations, Mrs. Thornton." Her voice was honey over steel. "It's been a pleasure, ladies, but we have purchases to complete." She turned her back on the stunned women, returning her attention to the shelf of canned goods. Quinn couldn't suppress a grin at the flash of spirit she displayed. Mrs. Holloway looked positively gleeful. "Thursday at 2 o'clock, she whispered to Catherine. "Don't miss it." Viola's face just now was worth the price of admission. They completed their purchases without further incident, though Quinn noted the speculative glances cast their way. As they loaded their supplies into the wagon, Sheriff Daniel Morgan approached, his weathered face breaking into a welcoming smile. "Quinn, good to see you in town," he said, extending his hand. "And this must be your bride-to-be." "Catherine Prescott," she introduced herself, accepting the sheriff's handshake. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sheriff." "The pleasure's mine, Miss Prescott. Quinn's one of our finest citizens. You couldn't have chosen better." Morgan's eyes took in her scar without any change in his friendly expression. "Will you be staying in town for supper? Martha's serving her famous beef stew at the hotel dining room tonight." "Not today," Quinn replied. "We should get back before dark, but we'll take you up on that another time." As they headed out of town, Catherine was quieter than usual, her expression thoughtful. Quinn gave her the space to process the afternoon's events, focusing on guiding the wagon along the rutted trail. Finally, as the ranch came into view, she spoke. "They'll always see the scar first." Quinn considered his response carefully. "Some will, others won't. The ones worth knowing are the latter, like Sheriff Morgan." "And Mrs. Holloway," Quinn added. "There are good people here, Catherine. They'll come to know you for who you are, not what happened to you." "Perhaps," Catherine said, sounding unconvinced. "But I've learned not to expect too much from people." That evening, after a simple supper, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in spectacular hues of orange and purple. The air was cooling, carrying the scent of pine and sage. From somewhere in the distance came the lonesome howl of a wolf. "Will you tell me how it happened?" Quinn asked quietly, gesturing to her face. "You don't have to, but I'd like to understand." Catherine was silent for so long that he thought she might refuse. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but distant, as if she were reciting a story about someone else. "They came at night, 3 men. Father owed them money, gambling debts, I later discovered, though he'd told me his borrowing was for business investments." She paused, her fingers absently tracing the ridge of her scar through her sleeve. "They demanded payment. Father begged for more time. They refused." Quinn remained silent, letting her tell it at her own pace. "They began to beat him. I tried to intervene. The leader, a man named Hargrove, pulled a knife." Her voice hardened. "He said he would mark me so that every time my father looked at me, he would remember his debt. That no man would want me now, so father would be burdened with my care forever." Quinn's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Bastards." "Indeed," Catherine agreed dryly. "The irony is that father couldn't bear to look at me afterward, not out of disgust, I think, but out of guilt. He hanged himself the next morning, left a note confessing his gambling and apologizing for what he'd brought upon me. And these men, they were never punished." Catherine laughed bitterly. "They were respected businessmen, or appeared to be. I went to the police, but without father to corroborate my story, it was dismissed as hysteria. A tragic home invasion by unknown assailants, the official report said." "So you came west," Quinn concluded. "Not immediately. I tried to rebuild my life in Philadelphia. But the stares, the whispers, the revulsion, it became unbearable." She turned to face him fully, no longer hiding the scarred side of her face. "Even those who claimed to be understanding couldn't help but look away. Men who had once courted me suddenly had no interest. Friends made excuses not to be seen with me. Eventually, I saw your advertisement in the newspaper and thought, Perhaps a fresh start with someone who had never known me before would be better than continuing there. Quinn studied her face in the fading light, the smooth perfection of her left side contrasting with the jagged disruption of the right. But it was her eyes that captured him direct, unflinching, with a depth of experience that belied her years. "Thank you for telling me," he said simply. "You had a right to know what you're getting," Catherine replied. "I should have been forthright in my letters." "Would you have come if I had refused you based on your appearance?" Catherine considered this. "No. I would have found another advertisement, perhaps been more honest next time." "Then I'm glad you weren't forthright," Quinn said. "Otherwise, we might never have met." A small smile touched Catherine's lips. "You're a surprising man, Quinn Xavier." "As you are a surprising woman, Catherine Prescott." The days fell into a rhythm as they navigated their new life together. Catherine threw herself into ranch work with determination, learning the routines and adding her own improvements. She expanded the vegetable garden, reorganized the pantry, and took over the account books with an efficiency that impressed Quinn. Each evening, they would sit on the porch or by the fireplace, sharing the day's events and gradually revealing more of themselves to each other. Catherine attended Mrs. Holloway's quilting circle, returning with amusing stories about town gossip and a cautious optimism about several of the women she'd met. "Mrs. Peterson invited me to tea next week," she told Quinn as they worked side by side in the garden. "And Mrs. Baker offered to teach me how to make her famous sourdough bread." "Good women, both of them," Quinn approved. "John Peterson's ranch borders ours to the south, and Thomas Baker is the blacksmith." "Mrs. Thornton was notably cool," Catherine added with a wry smile. She made several comments about the challenges of finding suitable companionship in such a remote area. Quinn snorted. "Viola Thornton believes she's still in Boston drawing room. Pay her no mind." "I don't," Catherine assured him. "Though I admit it was satisfying to see her expression when Mrs. Holloway praised my suggestions for improving the church fundraiser." As the days passed, Quinn found himself increasingly drawn to Catherine's company. He admired her resilience, her sharp intelligence, and her dry wit. He noticed how she no longer turned the scarred side of her face away from him, though she still did so reflexively with strangers. And he observed how she came alive in the open spaces of the ranch, as if the land itself were healing something deep within her. The circuit minister was delayed by flooding along the river, postponing his visit to Clifton Hill by 2 weeks. Neither Quinn nor Catherine mentioned changing their plans. Instead, they continued their careful dance of growing acquaintance, learning to work together during the day and talk together in the evenings. One night, as they sat before the fire, Catherine reading aloud from a volume of Dickens while Quinn whittled a piece of pine wood, he realized with sudden clarity that he was content in a way he'd never been before. The thought startled him enough that he nicked his finger with the knife. "Are you all right?" Catherine asked, looking up from her book. "Just clumsy," Quinn replied, sucking the small cut. Lost in thought, Catherine marked her place and closed the book. "What were you thinking about?" Quinn hesitated, then decided on honesty. "About how right this feels." "You being here." A flush crept up Catherine's neck. "Does it?" "Yes," Quinn said simply. "Does it feel right to you?" Catherine considered the question, her eyes on the dancing flames. "I wasn't sure it would," she admitted. "I came with hope but no expectations. I thought perhaps we might develop a partnership of convenience and mutual respect." She paused. "I didn't expect to feel at home." The word hung between them, fragile and significant. "Is that what you feel?" Quinn asked. "At home, increasingly," Catherine nodded. "Though it still surprises me." Quinn set aside his whittling. "Catherine, when the minister comes." A sudden pounding on the door interrupted him. Quinn rose quickly, hand instinctively moving to the rifle mounted above the fireplace. It was nearly 9 o'clock, too late for casual visitors. "Quinn, it's John Peterson," came a shout from outside. "We need help." Quinn threw open the door to find his neighbor on the porch, his face grim in the lantern light. "What's happened?" Quinn demanded, reaching for his coat. "Rustlers hit the Morris place," Peterson explained breathlessly. "Took most of his herd and burned his barn. Sheriff's forming a posse to go after them. They're headed north, might come through your upper pasture." "I'll saddle Rusty," Quinn said, already moving toward the door. "Wait," Catherine called, hurrying to the kitchen. She returned with a packet wrapped in cloth. "Food, you'll need it." Quinn accepted the bundle, their hands touching briefly. "Stay inside with the doors locked. There's a loaded shotgun in my bedroom." "Be careful," Catherine said, her eyes conveying more than her words. Quinn nodded, a silent promise passing between them. Then he was gone, racing toward the barn with Peterson. Catherine watched from the porch until their lanterns disappeared into the darkness, then reluctantly went back inside, securing the door behind her. The cabin suddenly seemed too quiet, too empty without Quinn's solid presence. She built up the fire, made a pot of coffee, and settled in for a long vigil. Hours passed. Catherine tried to read but couldn't focus on the words. Eventually, she retrieved the shotgun from Quinn's room, the weight of it unfamiliar but reassuring in her hands. She positioned herself in a chair with a clear view of both the door and the window, determined to remain awake until Quinn returned. Dawn was breaking when exhaustion finally claimed her. She jerked awake at the sound of hoofbeats, the shotgun nearly slipping from her grasp. Cautiously approaching the window, she peered out to see Quinn dismounting from a weary Rusty. His clothes were dusty, and he moved with the stiffness of a man who had been in the saddle all night. Catherine flung open the door, relief washing over her. "You're back." Quinn looked up, his tired face brightening at the sight of her. "Caught them near the territorial border. Sheriff has them in custody." "Were you hurt?" Catherine asked, eyes scanning him for injuries. "No, just tired. Morris lost most of his cattle, though, and his barn's gone." Quinn led Rusty toward the water trough. "I told him he could use our south pasture until he gets back on his feet." Catherine nodded her approval, following him to the barn. "That's generous of you. It's what neighbors do out here," Quinn said simply, removing Rusty's saddle. "We look out for each other." Once the horse was tended to, they walked back to the cabin together. Quinn paused at the door, noticing the shotgun Catherine had set aside. "You kept watch." "I tried," Catherine admitted, "though I apparently fell asleep toward morning." A strange expression crossed Quinn's face, tender and protective, and something more. "Thank you," he said softly, "for caring enough to worry." Inside, Catherine insisted Quinn eat before resting. While she prepared a simple meal of eggs and leftover biscuits, he washed the trail dust from his face and hands at the basin. "The minister's coming Sunday," Quinn mentioned as they ate. "Sheriff told me he arrived in town yesterday." Catherine nodded, suddenly nervous. "So we have 3 days to prepare." "Catherine," Quinn began, then hesitated. "If you're having second thoughts, are you?" She interrupted, her eyes meeting his directly. "No," Quinn answered without hesitation. "I want you to stay, as my wife." "Then we're in agreement," Catherine said, a smile spreading across her face. "Because I want that too." Relief and joy mingled in Quinn's expression. "Good, that's good." After breakfast, Quinn retired to his room to catch a few hours of sleep while Catherine tackled her usual morning chores. By afternoon, he had rejoined her, and together they discussed plans for the wedding. It would be a simple affair, a ceremony at the small church in town, followed by a gathering at the hotel dining room. "Mrs. Holloway insists on baking the cake," Catherine told him as they worked together to mend a section of garden fence. And apparently Mrs. Baker is organizing some sort of celebration dinner. The whole town will turn out, Quinn warned. It's not often Clifton Hill gets a wedding. Catherine's hand stilled on the wire she was holding. Will that bother you, having everyone staring at us? Quinn set down his pliers, turning to face her fully. Catherine, the only person I'll be looking at is you. Everyone else can stare all they want, it won't change a thing. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. I still don't understand why this doesn't trouble you, she said, gesturing to her scar. Most men would be. I'm not most men, Quinn interrupted gently. And I've seen far worse things than a scar. The war taught me that what matters is who a person is, not how they appear. Catherine studied him, searching his face for any sign of deception or pity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. I believe you mean that. I do, Quinn confirmed. And I'll say those same words on Sunday if you'll have me. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the September sky a perfect Colorado blue. Quinn rose early, completing his essential chores before riding into town to prepare. Mrs. Holloway had arranged for Catherine to dress at her home, maintaining the tradition that the groom shouldn't see his bride before the ceremony. The small white church at the edge of town was filled to capacity by noon. Quinn stood at the altar in his best suit purchased years ago for a cattle auction in Denver, and rarely worn since, with Sheriff Morgan beside him as his best man. His collar felt too tight, and his palms were sweaty, but his heart was steady with certainty. A murmur ran through the congregation as the door opened and Catherine appeared. She wore a simple gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Peterson had helped her alter from her Sunday best dress. Her honey-colored hair was arranged in an elegant knot, adorned with small white flowers. She had made no attempt to hide her scar with powder or by arranging her hair to cover it. Instead, she walked down the aisle with her head high, her eyes fixed on Quinn. To Quinn, she had never looked more beautiful. The courage it took for her to face the entire town, to stand before them without disguise or apology, humbled him. As she reached his side, he took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Dearly beloved, the minister began, his voice filling the small church. We are gathered here today in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows, promises to love, honor, and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When Quinn slipped the plain gold band onto Catherine's finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother, he saw tears glistening in her eyes. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. You may kiss your bride. Quinn gently cupped Catherine's face, his thumb brushing the ridged tissue of her scar with the same tenderness he showed to the smooth skin of her cheek. Then he kissed her, a soft, reverent kiss that carried the weight of his promise. The celebration afterward was lively, with seemingly the entire town crowding into the hotel dining room. There was music from Tom Wilson's fiddle, dancing, and more food than Quinn had seen in one place since before the war. Catherine moved through the crowd with growing confidence, accepting congratulations and welcoming embraces from their neighbors. Even Viola Thornton made an appearance, offering stiffly formal good wishes before departing early. Quinn noticed Catherine's triumphant little smile as the banker's wife left. Enjoying your victory, he teased, bringing her a piece of Mrs. Holloway's magnificent cake. Immensely, Catherine admitted, accepting the plate, though I suspect we haven't seen the last of her disapproval. Probably not, Quinn agreed, but we don't need her approval to be happy. As the afternoon waned into evening, Quinn found himself increasingly eager to return home, their home now, truly shared. When he caught Catherine stifling a yawn behind her hand, he used it as an excuse to begin their farewells. They left amid cheers and good-natured teasing, Quinn helping his bride into their wagon before climbing up beside her. As they drove away from town, Catherine leaned against his shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "Happy?" Quinn asked, adjusting the reins to put his arm around her. "Yes," Catherine replied simply. "Are you?" "More than I thought possible," Quinn admitted. The truth of it surprised him how completely this woman had transformed his life in just a few short weeks. Twilight was settling over the land as they reached the ranch, the first stars appearing in the eastern sky. Quinn helped Catherine down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed, clutching his shoulders. "Carrying my wife across the threshold," Quinn explained, mounting the porch steps. "It's tradition." "Is it?" Catherine asked, her eyes twinkling. "Or is it an excuse to show off your strength?" "Both," Quinn admitted, pushing open the door with his shoulder. Inside, the cabin looked different, somehow warmer, more inviting. Catherine had added small touches over the past week's curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the back of the sofa, wildflowers in a mason jar on the table. But beyond these physical changes was the sense that the space was now truly a home, filled with shared memories and mutual purpose. Quinn set Catherine gently on her feet but kept his arms around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier." "Thank you, Mr. Xavier," she replied, her hands resting on his chest. The gold band on her finger caught the lamplight, gleaming warmly. Later that night, as moonlight spilled through the bedroom window, Quinn traced the path of Catherine's scar with gentle fingers. From her temple down her cheek, along her neck, across her collarbone, and down to where it finally ended just above her breast. Unlike earlier times when she had flinched from his gaze, she now lay still, watching his face as he mapped the evidence of her past pain. When his fingers reached the end of the scar, he bent to press his lips to the marred skin, whispering against it, "You." "What?" Catherine asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You," Quinn repeated, meeting her eyes. "Not your scar, not your past, not what happened to you, just you, Catherine, all of you." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. "I never thought anyone would look at me and see past it." "I see you," Quinn assured her, wiping away her tears. "I see your strength, your courage, your kindness. I see the woman who stands up to Viola Thornton without flinching, who expands my garden and corrects my account books, who waits up all night with a shotgun when I'm away." He kissed her softly. "I see you, Catherine Xavier, and I love what I see." "I love you too," Catherine whispered, the words new and precious between them. "I didn't expect to, but I do." "That makes two of us," Quinn admitted. "When I sent that advertisement, I hoped for a partner, maybe eventually a friend. I never imagined that you'd end up with a scarred Easterner who argues about cattle breeding methods," Catherine suggested with a small smile. "That I'd find the other half of my heart," Quinn corrected, drawing her closer. "That I'd find you." Spring came early to Clifton Hill the following year, bringing with it new calves, fresh green grass, and the news that Catherine was expecting their first child. Quinn received the announcement with stunned joy, lifting his wife off her feet and spinning her around the kitchen until she laughingly protested. "Put me down, you foolish man," she demanded, though her eyes shone with matching happiness. "I'm in a delicate condition now." Quinn complied but kept his hands on her waist. How long have you known?" "Dr. Matthews confirms I'm about 3 months along," Catherine replied. "The baby should arrive in late summer." Quinn placed a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby." "The first of several, I hope," Catherine said, covering his hand with her own. "I've always wanted a large family, as many as you want," Quinn promised, kissing her soundly. The following months brought changes to the ranch. Quinn hired a young man from town to help with the heavier work, allowing him to spend more time close to home as Catherine's pregnancy progressed. They converted the small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, Quinn crafting a cradle from pine while Catherine sewed tiny garments during the quilting circle meetings she now hosted at the ranch. Their life together settled into a rhythm of shared work and growing love. Catherine's scar faded in significance until it was simply another feature of her beloved face, like the tiny freckles across her nose or the slight dimple in her left cheek when she smiled. The whispers in town gradually subsided as she became known for her keen business sense, her generous spirit, and her unwavering support of her husband. In late August, after 18 hours of labor that left Quinn pacing the porch in terrified helplessness, Thomas Alexander Xavier made his entrance into the world, announcing his arrival with a robust cry that brought tears to his father's eyes. "He has your eyes," Catherine murmured exhaustedly as Quinn knelt beside the bed, cradling their son with trembling hands. "And your chin. But your spirit, I think," Quinn replied, noting the strength in the tiny fist that gripped his finger. He fought his way into the world with determination. "A Xavier trait if ever there was one," Catherine teased weakly. As Quinn gazed at his wife and newborn son, he was overwhelmed by gratitude. For the advertisement that had brought Catherine to him, for her courage in coming west despite her fears, for the life they were building together. "Thank you," he whispered, pressing his lips to her temple where her scar began. Catherine smiled, understanding all he didn't say. "For what?" "For refusing to hide," Quinn said simply. "For being brave enough to be seen." Over the years that followed, the Xavier Ranch prospered and grew. They added to their cattle holdings, diversified into sheep, as Catherine had suggested, and established a small horse breeding operation that gained regional recognition. Their family grew as well. Thomas was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, 2 years later, and then by twins, Sarah and James, 3 years after that. Catherine's scars, both the visible one on her face and the invisible ones on her heart, faded with time, though they never disappeared completely. Occasionally, a new acquaintance would stare too long or a child would ask an innocent but painful question. But these moments became easier to bear with Quinn beside her, his steady presence a reminder that she was seen and loved for herself. 10 years after their wedding, they hosted a celebration at the ranch, an anniversary party that brought together friends and neighbors from Clifton Hill and beyond. The yard was decorated with lanterns and wildflowers, tables laden with food prepared by Catherine, and the network of women who had become her closest friends. Music drifted from the barn, where the younger generation danced while their parents watched from the porch. "Quite a gathering," Sheriff Morgan commented, now gray-haired but still sharp-eyed. "Hard to believe it's been 10 years. "Feels both longer and shorter," Quinn replied, his gaze finding Catherine across the yard where she stood laughing with Mrs. Holloway. At 40, she was more beautiful to him than she had been at 25. Confidence had replaced caution, and joy had softened the edges of old pain. "You two built something special here," Morgan observed. "Not just the ranch, but the family, the community around you." Quinn nodded, watching as Thomas, now 9 and the spitting image of his father, helped his younger brother James up after a tumble. Nearby, Elizabeth and Sarah were teaching younger children a clapping game, their honey-colored braids so like their mothers swinging with their movements. "We've been blessed," Quinn agreed. "More than I ever expected." Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Quinn and Catherine sat on the porch swing, watching the moon rise over the mountains. The years had added silver threads to Quinn's sandy hair and fine lines around Catherine's eyes, but the way they leaned into each other spoke of a connection that had only deepened with time. "Happy?" Quinn asked, echoing the question he'd first posed on their wedding night. Catherine smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Completely. You, beyond words," Quinn replied, his arm tightening around her. His free hand reached up to trace the familiar path of her scar, the gesture that had become, over the years, their most intimate form of communication. A reminder of where they had begun and how far they had traveled together. "You," he whispered, his finger following the silvery line down to where it disappeared beneath her collar. "You," Catherine echoed, turning to press her lips to his. In the quiet of the Colorado night, surrounded by the life they had built together, they renewed the promise that had carried them through a decade of joy and hardship, triumph and loss. The promise to see each other, truly see each other through whatever the future might bring. And in that moment, as in countless moments before and countless yet to come, they were home,